Good morning. I guess it's still morning, at least for me. So my name is Jakub and I'm a member or lawyer in a law firm Poláček and Partners, and the title of my presentation will be Credit Card Stronger Than the Law, Chargeback Over the Law. First of all, I will try to briefly introduce our law firm, just briefly. Well, at this point there's 10 of us. We grow quite rapidly. We are ranked regularly. The year 2018 is not there because it's not finished, and I was a little bit lazy while I was preparing the presentation. We are part of the Interlaw, which is a global network of leading law firms all over the world. And yes, we have some strong sides, like, for example, we have some groundbreaking decisions in the energy sector, like also decided by the Constitutional Court. Now, let's get to the point. What's chargeback? How many of you are familiar with the chargebacks? Yes, you are, as I expected. So, I believe that most of you have a credit card, or at least you were included in the transaction where the credit card was present. At least those of you who run some business. And this is where the chargeback becomes relevant. What is chargeback? Chargebacks, as it's written right here, are forced transaction reversal initiated by the cardholder's bank. They differ from the traditional refund when you approach the business or the merchant in one simple way. Rather than contacting the business and asking for a refund, you go over the merchant's head and ask the bank to forcibly remove funds from the business's bank account. So it's not willing, the merchant or the business won't pay you willingly, at least at the beginning. Chargebacks are, from a certain point of view, a service related to the ownership of the credit card. They developed out of the need to protect cardholders from the frauds or thefts of the credit cards. There are several players involved: cardholder, issuer, merchant, acquirer, card association, where cardholder is basically the person holding the credit card. Then we have the issuer. That's basically the cardholder's bank, the bank who issued the credit card. Further, we have here merchant. Basically, that's the business selling, for example, goods and services to the cardholder, like, for example, airline. And then we have here acquirer. That's basically the bank of the merchant. It's the bank that acquired payment on the merchant's behalf. And at last, we have here card associations. It's, for example, Visa, MasterCard, and so on, PayPal. And these oversee the process, more or less. They try to. The process of the chargeback, well, is relatively simple. If cardholder has an issue with the transaction and he cannot solve it with the merchant directly, he may initiate the chargeback process. Yeah. So that's the concept, and it seems relatively simple. Actually, it's not that simple. Even the simplest chargebacks include several interactions between the parties, as you can see them here. And please note that cardholder and merchant do not communicate directly. They communicate via their banks. So what happens when we have a chargeback here? Luckily, I have no notes. If the cardholder has some problem or disputes the transaction, for example, the goods or services were not provided to him, he may initiate the process. Please note that each card transaction presents potential chargeback. For each transaction, there should be a separate chargeback. So you cannot have one chargeback for multiple transactions. And to make the things more complicated, but just that's just the note, even the bank of the card holders can sometimes initiate the chargeback process. So the cardholder files a chargeback. Then the issuer reviews his claim and decides whether it's valid or invalid. If it's invalid, the whole process stops, finished. If it seems valid, the issuer, usually it seems valid to the issuers because, to be honest, cardholders are customers of the issuers, so they tend to see the things from their point of view, and even the most impartial issuers. So the issuer reviews it and then takes action. What happens? Conditional refund is given to the cardholder, so he gets the money back at this point. Yeah, it may take just a few days, like 3, 4, 5, 6 days, and he has the money back. And the merchant account is debited. What's the problem? That merchants usually don't know that some process started. They just see that their account was debited, and it may catch them off the guard. And the time periods for them to take actions are really, really short. So the issuer takes action, cardholder is credited. And then the issuer sends the information to the acquirer. He assigns the case with a numeric code. It's called a reason code. The Visa and MasterCard and so on have some reason codes which determine what kind of chargeback it will be. For example, due to the fraud or theft of the credit card, or not provision of the goods or services. And the acquirer takes action. What he can do? Well, he can resolve the issue on his own, or he can contact the merchant and ask him to provide him with the so-called compelling evidence. It means that in other words, he asks him to prove that the transaction was relevant, it's not fraud, the services were provided. Then the merchant gives information back to the acquirer, and acquirer literally represents the chargeback to the issuer. It means that he presents the transaction from the point of view of the merchant to the bank of the cardholder. And the cardholder's bank makes the final decision. What can happen? Well, basically, issuer can rule in favor of the merchant, which means that the funds are given to him back. But by the way, the merchant may be given temporary credit in the process as well, but that will make the things just more complicated. So issuer can rule in favor of the merchant or can rule in favor of the cardholder. Merchant can either accept this or can try the arbitration process under the Visa and MasterCard rules, but I won't bother you with this because it's maybe too complicated. And the third possible outcome is that issuer, yes, accepts that the chargeback was invalid, but may start another chargeback for the merchant, and or due to the fact that there are some new evidences, or just assigns it to different reason code. Yes. So, for example, he will say that okay, it was not the theft of the truck. It was not the reason code that the goods and services were not provided, but it was the theft, and so on, and bother the merchant repeatedly. What I'm trying to say, by the way, that I'm not trying to say that chargebacks are bad, but I'm just trying to say that sometimes they are a little bit misused by otherwise honest cardholders. Process or problems. Chargebacks are easy to abuse. As I already mentioned, the issuers tend to see the things from the point of view of the cardholders, which basically means that they rule in favor of the cardholders. And this turned the chargeback into a no-hassle solution for the customers who just don't want to bother with the merchant. They just want the money back and quickly. The chargeback process is highly susceptible to friendly fraud. As I already mentioned, what's friendly fraud or cyber shoplifting? It means that, for example, you order goods or services, they are provided to you, and you just don't want to pay. So you initiate the chargeback process, and you rely on the fact that the most merchants don't know just how to defend themselves, and you just get your money back, and the merchant is debited. When the merchant wakes up, it's already too late, so he provided goods for no remuneration in the end. And last, the burden rests mostly on merchants. What does it mean? Well, each chargeback means fee for the merchant. He needs to pay certain fee, and even if the chargeback process is cancelled, he still needs to pay a fee and some administrative costs. If the chargeback rates of the certain merchants are high, the fees get even higher. Third, if chargeback rates remain about some acceptable level, the merchant's account may be terminated. Well, that's a really annoying thing if someone terminates your account and you try to do business. And in the end, also that acquirers can create some deposit on the merchant's account, which is by the way with no interest, so it's not a pleasant thing. So, and now let's come to the point when we had briefly explained what the chargeback is. I will pick one example, and it's related to that part that chargebacks are outdated. Chargebacks were introduced in the pre-internet era, when and those are times of I don't know, it was 20th century, but early. They don't adequately address modern technologies and capabilities. I will try to explain it on the example of brokers, yes? Who are the brokers? They engage in activities aimed at enabling cardholder to conclude contract with merchant and act as a payment place. To be more precise or specific, let's talk about, for example, brokers in the field of air transportation, yes? You just buy the flight ticket and you use broker. These brokers usually act as a payment place. So you don't pay to the airline, you pay to the broker, yeah? And then he hands over the remuneration to the airline. Imagine that airline goes bankrupt. This happens, for example, like Air Berlin did, yes? And you have a bunch of angry cardholders whose flight tickets were cancelled and they want to refund. And many of them proceed with chargeback process. So what happens and where is the problem? I will try to explain. These brokers usually tend to be responsible just for enabling the cardholder to conclude the contract. They are not responsible for provision of the travel services, yes? That's the example. And for example, Visa rules state that if you have a conflict between applicable laws or regulations and the Visa rules, the laws shall govern. These brokers usually provide so-called information society services, yes? Maybe you know it from the latest decision in case of Uber, that Uber is actually not providing information society services, but these entities or entrepreneurs who just help two parties to conclude contract are not responsible for actual performance of the underlying service for the concluded contract, yes? So this is the regulation, that's e-commerce regulation. We have also national rules here. So the outcome is that the broker is not responsible for the failure of the airline, yeah? The one who broke or not fulfilled its obligation is the airline. But, as I mentioned previously, the poor broker was a payment place. So when the chargeback process is initiated, guess who is debited? The broker. So, and these brokers tend to defend themselves also by the decision of courts. For example, this one is from the Constitutional Court of Czech Republic, which actually just says that the broker is not responsible, shall bear no expenses, shall pay no remuneration to the customer. But in reality, what happens? This broker is debited, and for example, card companies, in one particular case, even Visa did not care. Just broker was just debited, and that's why I say that the chargebacks are over the law in this case, because it makes no help for the broker that he's not responsible. He just bears the expenses. Further, for example, MasterCard rules state that in no situation the cardholder may have a remuneration from both the the merchant or broker and and via chargeback process. What happens? Imagine that we have an insolvent airline. What these cardholders tend to do, they just register their claim in the insolvency proceeding. Nothing happens, no money is coming, so they get angry. Then they realize that they have a chargeback option. So they initiate the chargeback process and even confess that they registered their claim and initiated the chargeback process. Under this rule, particular rule of MasterCard, the chargeback should be refused. Yes, because there is at least potential chance that the cardholder will be credited twice. Once by insolvency administrator of the airline and once by the chargeback process. Guess what happens in reality? Well, usually the chargeback is accepted and the claim in the insolvency proceeding is not declined, so they are waiting for double money sometimes, at least to some extent. And this is the problem. It may seem to you like a particular issue, but imagine that you are run, for example, a shop, and your revenue or your profit from the transaction is, for example, 10 euros per transaction, 20 euros. And you get attacked by these fraudsters, these consumers or cardholders who try to abuse the chargeback process. It's even for you, sometimes for you, it's not even worth of fighting chargebacks. But the problem with the chargeback is that if there is one chargeback, usually there is a second and the third, and then there is 100 of them, and that's the problem. So what we are dealing with today is to try to persuade the acquirers, the banks of the entrepreneurs, to stand behind them in the same way as the issuing bank is standing behind the cardholder. We are not trying to prohibit the chargeback. Chargeback is good, especially, for example, when you buy something from China, it's better to use chargeback than trying to get a refund from the Chinese factory. So, and we have a wind of change here. It's presented by the PSD2 directive on payment services in the internal market, which presented payment initiative services as an alternative option. What does it mean? Basically, these new possibilities present an alternative to hegemony of the card associations because they basically know that they are strong in their positions, and they maybe in the future they will tend to change their rules more significantly, because as far as I know, there are not many card associations in the world. Basically, all of you who has something else, who has a debit card different than Visa or MasterCard in this room? Who? Is there anybody? You have. What do you have? You have PayPal. Yeah, but usually the same associations who issue the debit cards issue the credit cards as well. So all of you have the MasterCard or credit card, Visa. So I don't know whether there are any questions. What I wanted to tell you, what the message was, is that we have here some regulations which are not prepared by the countries. Some countries have the chargebacks included in their legislation, for example, like UK. But in Slovakia, for example, we do not have it. And sometimes these rules are in contrary with the applicable law. And what happens really often is that not the applicable law prevails, but these rules prevails. And that's the problem. And it should be solved in some way. What we are actually trying to do, but the banks don't tend to listen. So, do you have any questions? You do not. You do.
Do you maybe have any statistics on the misuse of chargebacks in Slovakia?
Well, no, I don't have it here right now, but in Slovakia, it starts to, for example, we had a client, and it was related to the certain state of the market, and that was hundreds in a week. So if you sell goods or services and you have hundreds of chargeback, and first of all, you lose money for the transaction, you have to pay fee, and this happens without your consent, and you wake up and you have no funds on your account. I think it's a pretty important issue to deal with. But in the world, for example, in Southern Asia, you have whole firms of thousands of people who try to help merchants to fight these chargebacks, because it's a big issue. And if you talk about the chargeback, you are not just concerned about the Slovak customers in case of Slovak merchant, because chargeback is unified all over the world. You know, Visa, MasterCard, you have it in Russia, you have it in Brazil, you have it in Canada, everywhere. So you never know whether you will be hit by chargeback from America. And in America, for example, it's widely used. Widely, it means not thousands, it's millions of chargebacks. So, and it's coming to Slovakia slowly, as I see. Any further questions?
Maybe I have a point in relation to what you said that would be interesting. So, for instance, in my case, once I had to call another company, so I bought a ticket through their direct website, and then I had to change it. And well, they said, okay, we will not charge you with that. After some times, I still realized that they had charged me on that. Mm-hmm. So I phoned them back, and after some time, they decided, okay, we started the procedure internally. So I'm not using a broker here. Okay. The first question would be, is this technically considerable as a chargeback process from inside? And then I have another question related to this. If tomorrow, for instance, I have a flight and the flight is disrupted, could be different causes, but at the end of the day, I bought a ticket, I'm not using this. Okay. And I can complain using the EC regulation, but especially with some loafer companies, it doesn't really work.
You have also special directive of EU in this case.
Can be, for instance, a consumer be more tempted to use a chargeback because at the end of the day, the final goods, the final service has not been delivered. Then we have to see if it's force majeure or it's some other option. So if you could maybe elaborate on that briefly. Okay. It could be interesting.
Well, basically, you have a flight. The flight was cancelled. You can use that process used by prescribed by the directive. The chargeback is definitely faster because in case of chargeback, you get credited in terms of days. Yes, you don't pay anybody for doing so. It's service related to ownership of the credit card. You just go to your bank, fill the form, and that's all. The bank cares for the rest. Yes. In case of using some specialized firm, on the basis of that directive that the flight was cancelled, you need to be involved. You need to pay someone, and the remuneration. And I don't know whether you tried it, but it takes not days. It takes weeks, months, and so on. So if I were you, I would try chargeback. Yes. And even if something went wrong in the process of chargeback, your bank, you just go to your bank again and say, do it once more. Yes. And they assign it to different reason code. For example, they have a special reason code, by the way, for the travel services not provided in Europe. They have a special reason code for general reason code for goods or services that are not provided generally, not travel services and so on. So you have multiple options via the chargeback process. If I were you, I would proceed like that. It's free, it's faster, and it don't bother you. It will rest on the merchant, which is basically the point of my presentation, which is sometimes good, usually for the merchants bad. And please don't do the cyber shoplifting, if possible. Pay for the goods and services.
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, maybe one question. How do you see the change of the chargeback for the future? And do you think it should be changed on the level of the associations, Visa, MasterCard, or should be basically covered locally by the acquirer banks, which you said should be standing behind the acquirer?
That's actually a really good question. First of all, these chargeback rules change quite often. For example, Visa changed it last time, I guess, in May 2018. But they do not change it significantly, just a little bit. For example, it was a reaction on this a little bit of reaction on this directive. So these rules should be adjusted if you see these rules, there are some clauses related to the special countries. For example, in France, does not apply this. In Denmark, does not apply. Yes, And we should be more active in this case in Slovakia as well. Maybe it's the thing which regulators should do to contact these associations. And to the second part of your question was that whether the acquirers, the banks of the merchants, should be more active. Yeah, they should be. And why they are not? For example, we had a speaker here from Tatra Banka in the opening. Tatra Banka is quite a big company in Slovakia. But if we take it globally, is Tatra Banka a big bank, or is MasterCard or Visa bigger? They are far bigger. They just sometimes just don't care what acquirers say, whether they try to defend the merchants. So usually these acquirers just resign at the beginning. They just don't care. They just say the merchant provide me with some evidence. I will submit to the issuer, and the issuer will rule as he wants. So what needs to be done? I think the banks associations in Slovakia, maybe regulators, should join together and address these associations to create some exclusions in their regulations. For example, like in the process of the insolvency proceeding, it's not possible. In Slovakia, we have an institute called unlawful enrichment. It means that you cannot get money for nothing with no reason, or get money for same things twice. Yeah, it's against the law. But actually, what happens in this case? It's unlawful enrichment is against law because not this case. This case, the consumer gets paid from the insolvency and by the chargeback process. So that's the answer. I don't know whether I addressed your questions 100%, but I try to. We need to put more subjects together.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I would like to invite you also, to take the chance, also the coffee break.
Yeah, sorry.